Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack your sources and really get to the heart of the insights. Today, we are taking a really deep plunge into cross-border startup growth. The material you shared gives us this fascinating spectrum, from these booming partnerships, these international corridors.
Yeah, like the UAE India one.
Exactly. All the way to universal strategies for tech scaling, and then the really tough side startups dealing with heavy sanctions.
It's quite the range. Shows how different the playing field can be.
So our mission today, let's navigate this. Let's pull out the core lessons. What helps startups actually succeed internationally? And crucially, how do things like geopolitics, local rules, how do they totally change the game for these companies? Let's get started.
Absolutely. It's a picture of, well, both huge opportunity and significant hurdles, depending on where you look. The sources really lay out that contrast.
Okay, let's kick off with that positive example then, the UAE and India. Centuries of business ties, sure, but the sources show this is now a really powerful startup partnership.
That's right. And what really jumps out is how their strengths complement each other. It's almost a perfect match in some ways.
How so?
The UAE brings, top-tier infrastructure, that strategic global location, a very pro-business setup. And India, it has this incredibly vibrant, huge startup scene. Over 130,000 startups, the sources mentioned.
Wow, 130,000. That scale is just immense. And the sources talked about formal agreements speeding this up.
Yeah, definitely. CPEI, the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, gets highlighted quite a bit. It seems specifically designed to boost that investment, that collaboration. And you see it working in specific sectors. Fintech is a big one. Indian startups using UAE sandboxes like DIFC, ADGM, partnering with local banks. Health tech too, and logistics, those seem to be flourishing.
It's interesting how it's moved beyond just, traditional trade. It's really integrated into innovation now. The sources mentioned Indian startups used to look mainly to the U.S., right? Has that changed?
It really has. According to the material, the U.S. is still important, obviously, but the UAE has become a primary focus for many. They see its position, its financial setup, not just for raising money, but as a launchpad, a gateway.
A gateway. To where?
To the wider Middle East, to Africa. It's often a faster route to genuine global reach than maybe going west first.
Okay, so thinking launchpad, not just funding source. That's the key takeaway. So for a startup thinking about that launchpad, what practical steps did the sources suggest? How do you actually enter the UAE market?
The sources lay out a pretty clear roadmap, actually. Step one is navigating the regulations, licensing, compliance, all that. And they strongly suggest using local consultants, legal help. Business advisors, don't try it alone.
Right, local knowledge is key.
Absolutely. Then, building local networks, finding mentors, advisors, going to the right events. That's vital for connections, for understanding the nuances. Accessing funding, of course. Tapping into UAE-based VCs, private equity, maybe government programs.
Makes sense.
And then adapting your product. It often needs tweaks for local tastes, local rules, and finally, strategic partnerships, maybe joint ventures, leveraging local expertise, local channels. That can really accelerate things.
That sounds like a solid checklist. And the sources said this isn't just a one-way street. UAE startups are looking towards India, too.
Yes, exactly. That's part of the synergy. UAE ventures are exploring India, joining events like the Thai Global Summit. It really flows both ways, driven by those complementary strengths, creating, as one source put it, limitless possibilities. # universal strategies for tech global expansion.
Okay, let's step back a bit from that specific corridor. What about the bigger picture, the general playbook for tech startups going global? What do the sources say are the, universal principles here?
Well, what's interesting is that even though every region is unique, some core ideas apply almost everywhere. And the first big one, maybe the most critical insight from the sources, is that you must build on a solid home base first.
So prove yourself locally before you even think about going global.
Exactly. Your home market is your test lab. The sources emphasize asking those tough questions first. Is the product really scalable? Is the team ready? Are the finances solid? Nail that down at home, and your risk drops dramatically when you go abroad.
Okay, that makes sense. Foundation first.
And then comes the next big question. Where do you go? The sources stress you need to prioritize. Do deep research.
Not just pick the biggest market.
No, not necessarily. It's about demand for your product, understanding the competition, the cultural nuances, the business norms. You can't just assume what works back home translates.
Right. That sounds like a common mistake.
Definitely. The sources mention things like needing mobile-first approaches in Southeast Asia or needing really localized content. You have to adapt. Sometimes it's smarter to find a market with maybe less competition, but real organic interest in what you offer.
Okay, market research is key. What about the legal stuff? That sounds complicated.
It is, and it's an ongoing challenge. The sources really hammer this home. Data privacy rules, intellectual property, import-export laws, they vary hugely.
Did they give specific examples, like hurdles in certain places?
Yeah, they mentioned things like GDPR in Europe, big compliance challenge, or navigating cybersecurity and censorship issues in places like China. Often there are industry-specific certifications you just have to get.
So the advice is?
Get local legal help. Always. It's an investment, not an expense. It prevents massive headaches later.
Got it. Local legal experts. What about marketing? Just translate the website.
Oh, much more than that. The sources talk about localization. That means culturally relevant images, messages that actually resonate. Using local influencers or partners can be huge for building trust. They mention Japan as an example, where trust and quality in marketing messages often beat speed or price.
Interesting. So it's about cultural nuance.
Definitely. And understanding which channels people actually use locally. Facebook, WeChat, something else entirely. And that ties into relying on local expertise generally. Hiring local talent, finding local distributors or agencies. The sources say this speeds up entry and builds credibility fast.
Makes sense. Boots on the ground.
Then there's the tech side. Internationalization and localization again.
Okay, break those down. Internationalization first.
That's about designing your systems from the start to handle differences. Multiple languages, currencies, date formats, the technical plumbing.
So it's flexible by design.
Exactly. And localization is making it feel native in each market, supporting local payment methods, maybe different UI layouts if needed.
Right, making sure the app actually works smoothly for someone in, say, Brazil versus Germany.
Precisely. Building that flexibility in early saves so much pain later. And finally, logistics. Don't underestimate that. Supply chains, shipping, customs, tariffs. Gets complex fast.
Any tips there from the sources?
Yeah, diversifying suppliers helps. Using experienced freight forwarders. Investing in tech for better visibility into your supply chain. But ultimately, the sources frame this whole thing as a marathon, not a sprint. You need to measure constantly, get feedback, be ready to tweak your approach, pivot if you have to.
Continuous learning and adaptation.
That's the key for long-term global success. Hashtag the impact of sanctions and domestic issues on Iran's startup ecosystem.
Okay, so we have thriving corridors like UAE, India, and a general playbook. Now, let's pivot to a much tougher reality as shown in the sources. The extreme challenges for startups from countries under heavy sanctions. Iran is the main example here.
Yeah, it's a really stark contrast. What's fascinating, or maybe counterintuitive, is the sources describe this initial startup boom in Iran, roughly 2012 to 2016. Sanctions initially kind of forced innovation.
Forced innovation. How did that work?
Well, lack of access to global services meant local entrepreneurs, who are often highly skilled in Iran, had to step up. They either copied solutions or invented new ones for the local market, out of necessity.
So isolation spurred creativity at first?
Exactly, building on a strong local talent pool. But the sources are very clear. That couldn't last as the pressure ramped up. The situation got much, much worse after the U.S. left the JCPOA in 2018.
Okay, so what are the main obstacles now, according to the material?
Several big ones. First, investment just dried up. The political and financial risks became too high for most investors, both local and foreign. Even government-backed funding, which exists, is apparently often too small, doesn't always get fully distributed, and there were worries about fairness, nepotism, corruption concerns.
Right, and internal issues, too, not just sanctions.
Yes, domestic constraints are a huge problem. Internet restrictions are a major one. The government clamping down on access, especially during protests, well, that's an existential threat if you're a digital business.
Makes it impossible to operate reliably.
Pretty much. Plus, there's this big brother atmosphere the sources describe. Government interference, security concerns, often trumping things like user privacy, which is crucial for tech trust.
And what about access to basic tech tools, like from global companies?
That's another critical blow mentioned. As U.S. sanctions tightened, access to essential foreign hardware, software services got cut off.
Yeah.
Companies like Google, Apple, they had to pull back or limit services for users in Iran. That's a massive handicap.
Wow. So the result for startups inside Iran?
Huge hurdles. Accessing international markets, finding partners, getting acquired by foreign companies, it's incredibly difficult. Foreign firms are terrified of breaking sanctions, even indirectly.
And the impact on talent?
Brain drain. That's a major consequence highlighted. Many talented founders and tech workers are trying to leave, looking for more stable places to build their businesses.
Okay, so it sounds incredibly tough inside Iran. But the sources also shared some, well, more hopeful stories. Founders who did manage to succeed by going abroad.
Yes, and these stories are really powerful. They show what's possible when that talent connects with a supportive ecosystem elsewhere. The prime example in the sources is Board, founded by Iranian brothers who moved to Canada.
Right, using Canada's startup visa program.
Exactly. They built this platform to help international students apply to universities, simplifying a really complex process.
Yeah.
And their success has been phenomenal. Unicorn status, valued at, $4 billion at one point, created thousands of jobs in Canada.
That's incredible. It shows the potential that's maybe locked up inside Iran.
Precisely. And the sources highlight why the Canadian program was effective for them.
What are the key features?
A big one is it offers a direct path to permanent residency. It's not necessarily tied to the startup hitting specific financial milestones, which reduces pressure. Also, it doesn't require founders to invest huge sums of their own money or have a massive net worth, just enough to cover living costs initially.
That lowers the barrier significantly.
It really does. And you can qualify in different ways, get funding from a designated Canadian VC or angel group, or just get accepted into an incubator program. Plus, the sources mention Canada's general support system grants, subsidies, makes VC money go further. Looser pockets, as one source put it.
Makes Canada attractive for investment, too.
Yeah. Now, the sources do acknowledge there's a backlog in processing these visas, but efforts are being made. They're increasing the number of spots, extending work permits for applicants waiting. So, positive signs there.
Okay, Board is a great example. Any others mentioned?
Yes. Persian Horizon, an AI logistics startup. They moved from Tehran to Dubai.
Okay, leveraging the UAE ecosystem we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Using the free zones, incubators like Dubai Future Accelerators, DIFC. There's strategies involved being adaptable, really building strong networks in Dubai, taking a localized but global approach, and using tech smartly to bridge gaps.
So different locations, similar theme, finding success by relocating strategically.
That's the core message from these stories. Despite immense hurdles at home, Iranian entrepreneurs can thrive by tapping into these global ecosystems that offer stability, resources, and market access.
Sanctions keep coming up, clearly a huge factor. Given their impact, maybe we should zoom in on that complexity a bit more, strictly based on what the sources say about how they affect businesses.
Yeah, it's essential context.
Yeah.
It's a really multi-layered, evolving situation. The sources explain the why, primarily linked to Iran's nuclear program, human rights issues, support for terrorism. These aren't new. They've built up over decades from different players.
And it's not just one country imposing them.
No, that's the complexity. You've got measures from the U.S., the U.K., the UN, the EU. Each has different targets, different rules. The U.S. ones are particularly significant, targeting oil, finance-specific companies, and those powerful secondary sanctions.
Secondary sanctions, what are those again?
They basically punish non-U.S. companies for doing certain kinds of business with sanctioned Iranian entities. It creates a huge chilling effect globally. The sources mention recent U.S. additions targeting oil transport, for instance.
Okay. In the UK.
The U.K. has its own list, asset freezes, trade restrictions, especially on military or dual-use goods. They name specific targets like aerospace or space agency-related entities. But, importantly, the sources note U.K. law does allow some trade, agriculture, healthcare, food, humanitarian-type goods. But even then, compliance is absolutely vital.
Right. And the UN and EU?
UN sanctions have included things like arms embargoes, asset freezes. The EU focuses on trade bans, asset freezes, particularly things that could help nuclear activities or internal repression.
Wow. So for any business, especially a startup, just figuring out the rules must be a nightmare.
It absolutely is. The sources really stress that compliance isn't optional, especially if you have any links to the US, UK, or EU markets. You have to comply with all relevant regimes.
So what steps must a business take if they're even considering engaging within Iran, according to the sources?
Due diligence is paramount. Checking multiple sanctions lists, OFAC in the US, EU lists, UN lists, non-negotiable. Then get independent legal advice, specifically from lawyers who understand these complex overlapping sanctions regimes.
Don't rely on generic advice.
Definitely not. Identifying legitimate payment channels is another huge practical hurdle. How do you actually get money in or out compliantly? You might need specific licenses, like from OFAC, depending on what you're doing, and constantly manage the risks, legal risk, financial risk, and importantly, reputational risk.
Right, the risk of just being associated with a sanctioned environment.
Exactly. Plus, the sources briefly mention other challenges inside Iran, too. Market barriers beyond sanctions, economic volatility. It's tough on multiple fronts. Hashtag tag identifying opportunities within Iran, despite the challenges.
Okay, given all that, the sanctions complexity, the internal challenges, it sounds incredibly difficult. Do the sources point to any actual business opportunities inside Iran, despite everything?
Surprisingly, yes, which adds another layer to this whole picture. The sources highlight Iran's, well, resilience and significant domestic capability. They mentioned a recent average growth rate of 4 or 5%. Impressive local production, making a lot of their own industrial gear, most pharmaceuticals, even 1 million cars a year.
That is surprising given the isolation.
It points to that self-sufficiency, maybe forced innovation we talked about. Plus, it's a big country, large population, huge energy reserves. There's a substantial domestic market. And trade does still happen. The sources cite figures 146 countries exporting to Iran, worth around $40 billion in 2021. The UAE acts as a major hub for re-exports into Iran. The UK still sends significant goods, too.
So it's not entirely closed off.
No. And there's estimated untapped potential, too. Billions of pounds worth over the next few years, particularly in things like telecom gear, auto parts, certain agricultural goods.
Okay, so where specifically did the sources see potential within Iran? Which sectors?
They flagged a few key areas. Tourism and hospitality is one. There's a government plan aiming for 20 million tourists by 2025. Ambitious, but shows intent. Renewable energy, especially solar power projects. Healthcare and pharma needs modernization, and most people have insurance. Infrastructure is a big one. A huge construction market that needs upgrades in transport, urban development, telecoms. And agribusiness. It's a major part of Iran's economy, employs a lot of people, but faces challenges like water management where tech could help. Fertile land is there.
So opportunities exist, but accessing them sounds like the real challenge.
Exactly. The potential is there, driven by domestic needs and capabilities. But the sources are crystal clear. The path to market is extremely difficult because of sanctions, bureaucracy, risk. The absolute necessity, repeated often, is getting independent, expert legal advice before even thinking about engaging. It's a high-risk, high-complexity environment, even where opportunities seem apparent. Hashtag outtruck.
Well, this has been a really comprehensive deep dive. We've seen such contrast today. From that thriving UAE-India connection and the general rules for scaling globally, to the incredibly stark realities in sanctioned places like Iran, but also those amazing stories of entrepreneurs succeeding outside those environments. Thanks for bringing together the sources that let us explore all these different angles.
Yeah, it really highlights the resilience of entrepreneurs, doesn't it? But also just how much government policy and, frankly, global politics shape their chances. It makes you think. Sometimes whether a great idea becomes a unicorn or just struggles to survive, it might depend less on the idea itself and more on the environment the founders find themselves in, or the one they manage to reach.
That's definitely something to reflect on, how much the landscape dictates the journey. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. Keep exploring, keep learning.